Welcome to City Life. I'm Beverly Thompson. To say that we're living in a complex environment with a number of public safety issues right now would be an understatement. We have protests throughout the country and here in the Triangle. We're living through a global pandemic that's impacting everything, including policing efforts. And we're experiencing an increase in gun violence that has police and city leaders searching for answers. Leading our police department through all of this is Chief C.J. Davis. She's taken time out of her very full schedule to talk with me right now about some of the important issues that our community is facing. Welcome, Chief, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you for having me.
So, Chief, I want to start out by saying I just imagine it is such a hard time to be a police chief right now. While your department's job is to protect and serve, you're constantly being questioned about how you do it and if your actions could have been handled differently. How do you handle that with your staff as well as in the community?
Well, that's a good question. I hope I have a good answer for you for that one. It's a balancing act, Beverly, right now. I think law enforcement around the country is facing a very challenging time. And the balancing act comes with making sure that we continue to protect our communities and also address the issues that we hear that are being conveyed on the national stage about police reform and so many other questions. But at the same time, an increase in violent crime, that is occurring not just in our city, but around the country. And to ensure that the workforce, that the officers that come to work every day continue to be motivated, continue to have the resources that they need to get the job done. And at the same time, make sure that we're being held accountable for the work that we're doing. So it's a very complex environment right now. And even with a global pandemic, how do you get close to the community and at the same time stay at a distance? So we're gradually working through these very complicated issues, and there is no playbook. This is something out of 34 years. We are all leaning on each other to try to figure out what's the next best step. What is the next strategy to try to address violent crime. And as you know, our mission statement, here in the Durham Police Department, holds true to its tenets of reducing crime and building relationships with our community. Those are the two main tenets. And with the environment that we're faced with right now, it's a challenge, reducing crime and building relationships with our community.
I imagine so. One of the big issues right now surrounds the idea of police reform. Of course, this has been heightened by the protests that have been taking place throughout the country and right here in Durham. What are your thoughts on defunding police and police reform?
Well, I think, the terminology defunding the police took on a life of its own around the country. There were so many different definitions depending on, who was carrying the conversation about defunding. I know that, in conversations with other chiefs and other community members, there's a general consensus that communities need law enforcement. They need an entity that will respond to situations that our community members, quite frankly, can't navigate by themselves. So I never accepted defunding to mean abolishing police departments. I do believe, and I know that I would have support from other chiefs that would say that there are opportunities to really assess police departments and the services that we provide to the community, because many years ago, police departments didn't respond to the many social issues and social ills in the community that other governmental entities had the resources to respond to. So over the years, everything from mental illness to homelessness to domestic violence, and even though domestic violence is a part of our response to ensure scenes are safe, there's also opportunities for social work to be done. And sometimes those services aren't readily available, and we find ourselves training our officers to de-escalate, situations with that involve mental illness, and utilize crisis intervention training so that we can address homelessness and so many of the other social problems. So I do believe that police departments could use sort of a reallocation of the various types of services that we provide to the community that could potentially be provided by some other source, and that we aren't, hiring officers to fill those gaps, in the community. So I think there's a little bit of give and take there as it relates to what law enforcement looks like for the future.
So given all that, what is the current climate from the perspective of the police department? I mean, how do your police officers feel about all of this?
Well, I think the first thing that I would like to ensure that our community knows is that police officers are human beings, and that they have families, they are community members, they are involved in their communities and have children, and they're concerned about police response just like our community members are. One of Robert Peel's quotes is, and he's the father of community policing. And that quote is that the police are the community and the community are the police. And if we embrace that concept, then we can work together to find answers and to find a path forward. Right now, there is sort of a dichotomy between law enforcement and the communities that they serve, because a lot of the narrative is, defund the police, abolish the police, and it's come with the various protests. And, it's hard not to see it. But at the same time, you have officers that come to work every day that remain committed, that continue to do good work and continue to serve the citizens that they were sworn to serve. So it's a balancing act to continue to keep our officers motivated, to continue to communicate with our community, to let them know that no police department is perfect, and that we will continue to evaluate our processes, our procedures, our policies, to make sure that we provide the absolutely best service to our community that's just, that's procedurally just, that doesn't disproportionately target any particular community. And our officers are being told that, and they're being trained in that philosophy, to embrace that philosophy, that you treat the community as if those individuals in your community were your own family. And when you do that, it's hard to go wrong.
I hear you. That sounds good. I know that Durham has created the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force to look at ways to address policing and community needs. Are you involved with that effort at all? And if not, how do you and the administration address changes that are being demanded here in Durham and indeed across the country?
Well, I've been involved in the conversation on the periphery. I believe that the work is well intended. At some point, I hope to have more involvement as it relates to public safety, especially since I've been in this work for 34 years. I couldn't possibly think of a more valuable resource at the table, not just as a law enforcement professional, but as an African-American woman, member of my community, to be able to provide a wide perspective of what public safety could potentially look like in the future. So at some point, I sincerely hope to have more involvement in those conversations to potentially enlighten as well as be enlightened by these different perspectives.
Okay. Chief, since you've been here, you've been well known for community policing efforts, and you go out into the community, you attend church services, and many more activities throughout the community. That's one great thing I think people were refreshed by when you came here. Why is this so important for you to do that?
Well, I think it's a huge part of who I am, not just as a law enforcement professional, but also as a person. Throughout my career and throughout my life, I have been immersed in the community. My parents instilled in us community service, civic engagement, and it's just become, baked into who I am. So coming to Durham, I realized that it was sort of my niche, that this is not an environment or an activity or behavior that I found uncomfortable for me at all. And sometimes difficult conversations are the kind of conversations that we have to be courageous enough to be a part of in the community in order to find answers and solutions to problems. We can't be an island to the community that we serve, because that's exactly, who we are. We are here to serve our community. And, I say it jokingly, but, when a community member tells an officer that I pay your salary, they absolutely do. And they absolutely do. And they are our customers, and that's who we need to treat them as. And, I enjoy being in the community. I love children. And I get great pleasure out of just allowing young people to see the side of me that is the mother, that is the sister, that is the mentor. And I hope to lead in a way that my officers see how rewarding that type of interaction is, even as a police officer in the community.
I know we've gotten some great photos of you during National Night Out. Children love you, and mothers do too.
Well, I love them too.
But I would imagine COVID has thrown a monkey wrench into all of that. How are you working now to stay involved in the community?
Well, this is one time that I think that I have had to be, more creative than ever before, in my career. That, we have a pandemic that has literally created a barrier between, the police department and the community that we serve. And in some situations, it really requires officers to get up close, to a particular incident and a situation. But at the same time, they have to think about, protecting the public, from whatever that situation is, and protecting them from the potential of contracting COVID-19, and protecting themselves at the same time. So, our community engagement has been, at a social distance. We have participated in events and tried to be creative to have participate on the outside, and not in closed environments, participate in community engagement events where we're invited to participate as well. And we've used technology to continue to reach out to our young people in our Explorers program. We have sessions virtually with some of our young people. We've done a reading program, a virtual reading program. I actually participated in that myself with some of our students that are at home and, not able to get back into the classroom and actually have an officer to come in and read to them. So we're doing some videoing and reading to our young people, virtually. So this has been challenging for us. I don't know what grade we're going to get when we're all done with it. I'm hoping we're going to get a passing grade. But as I said before, there is no playbook for this. But we, as a police department, can't allow the pandemic to keep us from making connections whenever possible to the community. So we're constantly coming up with different creative ideas to deal with this situation.
So, Chief, how do you define success when it comes to community engagement, especially now?
Well, I think success is when the culture of the police department is shifted in a way where every officer embraces the concept of being an independent ambassador for building relationships. It can't be just me. It can't be just, my commanders or my exec team. It has to be every police officer taking advantage of opportunities to build relationships with our community as a force multiplier. When you think in terms of 500 plus officers that respond, whether it's in you know, a situation where a person might need something that's not so serious, or it's a serious type of situation where it's a domestic violence or a traffic accident or whatever the case might be, that encounter needs to be one that leaves a lasting impression, a positive impression with that person that we had to touch for that time. So success means for me to have a department that can be trusted by the community, and have a community that feels that they can trust the police department in a way that they help us to solve problems, help us to solve crimes, feel that information can be provided to us and that their identity is protected, because we need our community to help make our community safer.
Mm-hmm. So, Chief, I'm wondering, how else has the pandemic affected policing in Durham?
Well, I think it's instilled a sense of anxiety amongst, our officers, and of course the community as well. Everybody's trying to feel their way through this because the effects of the pandemic, according to the science, it seems to change periodically of what's risky and what's not risky. Having the appropriate protective equipment for our officers, making sure that they understand the various protocols to keep our community safe, shifting in the manner in which we enforce laws. We have actually elected not to do as many traffic stops or traffic enforcement. Of course, we want our roads to remain safe, but we had to sort of balance that and try to ensure that we weren't unnecessarily putting, our citizens in harm's way or threat of contracting COVID-19, and also our officers. So it's been a sort of a balancing act. The pandemic has also created barriers as it relates to, like I said, the community contacts, our PAC meetings. We normally have Partners Against Crime meetings once a month. And we could go into a community room with community members and neighborhoods and really talk about, some of the issues that are plaguing various communities and even the positive things that are happening. So now we're trying to identify ways to still touch those communities. As a matter of fact, we are working with contacting our PAC leaders so that we can set up sort of a Zoom community conversation and updates at least quarterly as we continue to be in this pandemic place, about, what are the crimes, what can the community do to help us, and what can they do to help themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it has presented quite a few challenges, for the city.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're working around everything, though, and still, managing to make that contact with the community, and that's always important. So now let's turn to another topic that I'm sure a lot of Durham residents know about and see in the media all the time, and that's gun violence. While the number of homicides is actually down from this time last year, the number of aggravated assaults, which includes non-fatal shootings, is up compared to this time last year. What do you think is behind that increase?
Well, I think there are, and this is just, a hypothesis, just from my experience of an exposure from what I see, not just here in the city of Durham, but around the country. And this is not unique to Durham. It's unique to Durham in the sense that our communities have not seen such an uptick in a while. But with the conditions of our pandemic, with our young people being out of school, with the conditions even in our jails, where jails are adjusting and readjusting their protocols as it relates to who will be incarcerated, who will not be incarcerated, and what's safe for our jails as well. This is just an environment that has allowed for, our various gangs in the city to to sort of wreak havoc, and especially with various neighborhood conflicts or individuals that are warring with each other. And that was one of the reasons why we requested additional resources to our gang unit. We originally requested 13 officers. That was before the pandemic. If you think about that, that was before the pandemic and before the upticks, because we had seen an increase in that level of activity. And I think it's important that we're just honest about what we know to be true. And we knew that there were some active members that were self-proclaimed members of various gangs that were actually shooting at each other and back and forth. And traditionally and historically, gangs would have more of a geographical turf or area that they would protect and fight in. Today, the more contemporary challenges that we have as it relates to gangs is that individuals will shoot at each other no matter where they are. They could be on the north side or the south side or at the grocery store or whatever the case might be, in a parking lot. A shooting could occur, and this activity creates an unsafe environment for other individuals that are just moving about their normal daily life. Just sitting in a car at a traffic light or on their front porch. We've had some very catastrophic incidents because of random gunfire. And it's very difficult to get your arms around it because many of the guns in the city are stolen from legal gun owners. At least 40% that we retrieve. And those are the ones that we actually get off the street, that we're able to determine that they came from, an individual where the gun was stolen. So we have really tried to approach this from a 360-degree angle, identifying those individuals that are participating in this kind of violent activity, and also communicating to our citizens and educating them on being a responsible gun owner and keeping your guns safe, keeping them locked, don't leave them in the car, and working both angles to try to suppress some of what we see.
Okay.
And of course, the pandemic has also created an environment that is sort of target-rich environment, because you have young people that are not in school. There are not a lot of activities right now, and I will say that many of the individuals that we encounter that are part of this type of activity are between the age of 15 to 17. And that in itself is concerning.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I think a lot of people find it particularly disturbing that a number of the shootings have involved people who are 17 and under. Do you have any ideas on how and why that's happening?
Well, there are a lot of opportunities to influence young people either way, to influence them towards, something positive, or influence them toward something very negative. And I think it's important that the response to these issues aren't just a police response. There have to be other entities involved in helping to redirect our young people's, activities on a day-to-day basis. And as we talk about the various services that could potentially help curtail crime and help take some of the workload off of police departments, a lot of it has to do with what do we do with our children before they have encounters with the police. The police department is the Band-Aid. We're the reactive source, so to speak. Of course, we have some proactive kinds of educational programs, but we're only one entity that can impact just a small number of young people, and we'll continue to do that. But I actually challenge as many other entities, whether it's our schools or our other civic organizations, to continue to be more involved with our young people at an early age. So by the time they get 15, 16, and 17, they don't end up in our laps. We want to keep young people out of jails, but we can't do that if the only time that, the encounter is done or the work is done is when they face or when they've already committed some type of criminal act. So I think that preventive and proactive, element is really important. And that's where some resources need to go. People are unemployed right now. There are impoverished communities. There are individuals that really need, health services, and we have some kids that are having, mental crisis too, that have mental health crisis, that really need emotional support and all kinds of other support that unfortunately police department can't provide. So I advocate for a holistic approach. I really do. Because I would love to see somebody put police departments out of business, and unfortunately, we're just not there yet.
So, Chief, you kind of touched on this before, but what is the department doing to address the gang violence?
Well,
related violence, I should say.
Exactly. Well, investigating gang crimes really takes a concentrated effort. It takes a collaborative effort from investigators to identify individuals who are involved in, and are validated as involved in gang activity. And validation really means that these individuals claim to be part of a particular group as they commit these various types of crimes. And, even though we've increased our gang unit by 6 individuals, they've made some significant progress in identifying individuals and even charging individuals with, some of the violent crimes that have been committed. And I'm talking about aggravated assaults, homicides, where, people have been hurt, and even robberies. Robberies can be quite violent too sometimes. They have had good success in identifying, because a lot of the crime that we see in our city, and I think it's probably the same in other cities, is committed by a small group of individuals, a very small group of individuals. And if we can address that instead of casting a wide net on communities, and we just are laser focused towards those individuals who are committing crimes, then we will see some success as it relates to suppressing those crimes. It has required conversations with our DA's office. Our Durham DA is working with us and has identified an individual who will be working with the gang unit on these particular types of cases. Our officers are trained so that they can, identify signs where gang involvement has sort of been the impetus behind certain types of crimes, whether it's drive-by shootings, home invasions, robberies. It's important for us to be able to connect those dots. And we're also working with the Durham County Sheriff's Department. The sheriff and I have a great relationship in working together, so that while we're working in the community to be proactive and build relationships, our being in the community also serves as a deterrent against various types of crimes.
Okay, so Chief, we touched on a lot of things. Big picture wise, what do you absolutely need to be successful in fighting crime, period?
Well, I think it's important that, we look at the data, we look at the statistical, data and information that's available to us as it relates to how we respond to the community's needs. And I think it's important that we don't ignore our community's outcry. When communities are affected by violent crime, it keeps them from having the level of quality of life that some of us in our city may take for granted. That we can go to bed and not worry about bullet holes, through our windows, or dropping to the floor, or throwing our children in a bathtub. No one deserves to live like that. And until we get our arms wrapped around those issues, and everybody can't handle that type of criminal activity and suppress it, without having some level of law enforcement response. I hope that we get to a place where we prevent crimes, that we have programs for our young people that help walk them through those very critical stages of life where they're most influenced, meaningful types of encounters so that they can get past their 19 and 20 and 21 and have a quality of life and a future that is crime-free, that's free of the influences of gang violence. And I think I want for our community the same thing that my neighbors want and other communities, especially communities of color that are disproportionately impacted by gang violence. And the frustration and anger that we see sometimes with other events, I would love to see that same anger and frustration every time a child is struck by a bullet. Every time an elderly person who's sitting on their front porch is struck by a bullet. We should be angry. We should want to work together to stop that. Whatever it takes to stop that. That's, what I want for our community. That's what I think we all want for our community, but it's going to have to be a collaborative approach.
So Chief, if I could get just a little personal now, what is it that keeps you up at night? You have a lot going on, and I'm just wondering what really bothers you.
Well, I would have to say that after spending 34 years in law enforcement, my intent, just entering this career was really all about, public service. I came from a military family, and it was all about public service and providing, that level of community engagement to my community. And as I see what's being played out on the national stage, and I know a lot of it has historical context, but as I see it played out, I think of who I am as a person and what I would like for the law enforcement industry to look like. And at this stage, what keeps me up is thoughts of how do we be brutally honest about what we see around the country and what needs to happen, and what role, we can all play. What role can I play in impacting that change? What the other things that keep me up at night is, concern, for the community and my police department. I'm responsible for both. I'm responsible for the community to keep them safe, and I'm responsible for every officer that goes out there that, jumps in a lake to pull somebody out of the lake that's impacted by COVID-19, that could potentially get shot by some of the gunfire that they're responding to as well. I'm concerned about both. And, and to suppress the violence means to create a safe environment for everybody, for the community that we serve and for the officers that are actually responding to these calls.
Okay. So on the flip side of that, what does a great day look like for you? And where at the end of the day can you go home and just sleep just a little easier, knowing that you've accomplished your job?
A great day for me is a quiet day. A great day is a quiet day, a day that my phone isn't ringing off the hook. A great day is a good book, great weather. We're enjoying, and that's what's really beautiful about the city of Durham this time of year. It's a very beautiful city. I took a walk with some of the officers yesterday just to, get some exercise, and we walked, downtown. And, it was just a moment of peace that we could enjoy the city and just, be a little visible in a different kind of way. That's a good day for me. On a personal note.
I pray for many of those good days for you and for all of us. Now it's such a challenging time. So Chief, it's been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you would like for the public to know about the police department's work?
Well, I would like for them to know that there are some outstanding police officers in the city of Durham, and I get far more emails about the great work that they do than negative types of comments. And unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't make the news, but it is still very gratifying to know that we've made great progress in the manner in which we encounter our community, the satisfaction that they do have about our response, and that we haven't seen some of the, I would say, systemic issues within our agency that plague some other agencies around the country. Mm-hmm. And as I said before, we're not a perfect police department, but at least we recognize that there's always room for improvement. We will always take a surgical look. We will always seek, transparency and opportunities to get input from the community and other individuals that we partner with. So I say to the public that we are dedicated to getting through these many challenges that I mentioned, everything from protests, because Durham has been very, blessed that only one incident really created the kind of violence that some of the other cities have seen on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. And we are going to continue to work to try to, intercept even that. We don't want anybody to think that Durham is a place that they can freely come and wreak havoc and violence and take from our citizens what they have worked so hard to build. So I will say that we will remain committed, even fighting gun violence. We will continue to work with our federal partners, our DA's office, and our community leaders to unify and campaign together for a safe community, a nonviolent community, a put down the guns community. Mm-hmm. So I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to continue working together.
Chief, thank you so much for joining me today. I know how busy you are, and even 30 minutes is crucial to your time. So I thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Beverly.
That does it for City Life. Don't forget to follow us on social media and watch us on the Durham Television Network and on YouTube, and listen to our podcast on iTunes. I'm Beverly Thompson. Thank you so much for joining me to learn more about City Life in Durham.